Hello, my name is Professor Dr. Anthony Teitler. I'm head of the International Relations Program here at the Karlshochschule. Today I'm going to talk to a certain extent mainly about the International Relations Program, although I would like to talk also more broadly about what the Karlshochschule offers as a university and my own role in all of that. Historically, I was a professional actor, and so for me that was a big part of understanding through literature how one's world works, how emotions work, how characters work. And I wanted to get a better sense, this was in the early 2000s, of why there's war in the world, why there's conflict, why there's so much inequality. And two defining events, I would suggest, were really something that propelled me to want to study international relations formally. And they were the events of 9/11, the Twin Tower attacks and so on, and the impending war in Iraq. But nonetheless, at the time, I didn't just want to be an activist on the streets protesting against, let's say, an impending war, but more trying to understand the idea of why conflict happens, why wars happen, but also what can be done about it, and also what can be done about it in a realistic way. So the idea here is that one can look at international relations through a more descriptive element, and then there's a more normative level, is what should we do about it? What should we do about unemployment here in Germany, in Brazil, in Tajikistan? What can we do about it? And it's this relationship between the what is and the what should be is what I and many other, of course, social scientists have an interest in. And it's something here at the Karlshochschule that we explore, the relationship between what is and what should be. So we are, and it's I would say a fundamental aspect, ethos of who we are as a university. And we don't just look at, let's say, the most powerful actors in the world. We also look about how people's lives are affected by, let's say, these powerful actors. So these more critical approaches also come into play. And so that's why we take in more critical perspectives like feminism, post-colonialism, critical theory, post-structuralism. And you don't need to know all these terms right now, but these theories, both mainstream and more critical, are part of what we do at the Karlshochschule. Within the IR, International Relations Programs, we have three specializations. One is international security, another is international law and human rights, and the third is development studies. So within international relations, as I emphasized before, we emphasize from the get-go, so in a subject like Introduction to International Relations, we look at both the history of the subject, the discipline, how it's evolved, but something I emphasize, and not just me as an educator, many others here at the Karlshochschule, is the relationship between theory and practice. So we look at more mainstream theories and more critical theories of how the world works, what goes on in the world, who are the key actors involved. But when we look at the different issue areas, whether it's security, political economy, human rights, environmentalism, we do this through these different theoretical lenses, because each theory helps us understand a particular slice of reality of how the world works, how it is, and if it tends to be, when we refer to more normative aspect, what should be done to change certain things that go on in the world. How can we improve people's lives? What's, again, realistic about changing? So within the International Relations Program, something that's emphasized is international relations more broadly, the interdisciplinary factor, all these different subjects, whether it's politics. And again, we emphasize the international element. But something I would emphasize from the get-go is we start off from the foundations in the first year, going through key theories, again, mainstream and critical, thinking how they're applied. If we want to understand, for example, why there may be protectionism, economic protectionism, why China and the United States are putting tariffs, trade barriers on one another, we have to understand the historical context. Not just look at one or two political actors, even if they are important, but looking at how the historical context has led up to this, how are things changing, and how can things be changed. If we want to understand right now, and it's been, of course, for 70 plus years, the Israeli-Palestinian question, then we have to again understand history. We have to understand the different actors involved in the region, globally. And what we do by bringing in the theory at the beginning, we're constantly emphasizing at this university also that we're not doing theory for theory's sake. It's always applicable And this is the applied science element of the Karlshochschule. And really, as the program evolves, we then have this more practice or praxis element. So we have a lot of community projects whereby some of the theories that students learn, that you would learn in the first year, let's say, starts to be applied not just in class, but also in a situation, a practical situation. So a community project where one is working for an NGO or supporting an NGO, which is what we offer really from this, well, in the second semester, but particularly in the second year. After the fifth semester, so it's really in the second year, we have what's referred to as an internship. And what that means is students really, again, get their feet wet, so to speak. They really get to experience a particular working situation. And a lot of students, for instance, work for international organizations, foreign ministries, non-governmental organizations, so a lot in the public sphere, but also in the private sphere, because of what an IR student does is very, very general. And this is the important point. As you have time at this university, you start to think, okay, this is more and more my interests. We have experiences, for instance, and I just give one or two concrete examples here, students who've gone and worked in various embassies, whether, let's say, German embassies in, I don't know, in Bangkok or in Copenhagen, whereby the students themselves get compliments from the diplomats, compliments even from the ambassador of the respective embassy. Why? Because the students in question have a good sense of the theoretical and conceptual issues that happen in international relations. And from there, the students themselves have a certain depth that they bring in with their analysis, with their communication skills. And having now been head of international relations for many years, I can say unreservedly how impressed I am with a whole host of students who basically start, in some cases students start quite shy, but within this 3-year arch, I just see them almost transform as a person, how as a human being they flourish, and you can see that they themselves are not only, let's say, more employable, but also that they're much more confident and open and connected with people around them, and also what they want to do in the world and what their place is in the world. I would start off with Introduction to International Relations. Why? Because I think for any IR student, it needs to think about how the history of a particular subject has evolved, how international relations came into being historically, and how it's evolved and where it's going. But by learning about these theories and understanding them, this is what sets a student in good stead for his or her future studies for the 3 years and beyond. It's difficult to say my favorite 3 because in a way I love all the modules that I lead. But I would say another one that I particularly enjoy is foreign policy analysis. And why? Because foreign policy analysis emphasizes both states as well as non-state actors. Basically, why is it and how do these particular countries make the decisions the way they do? Again, it's very interdisciplinary. We have psychology, we have behavioral economics, we have security aspects, but a key to all of that is the relationship between the structures, the legal, political, economic frameworks, but also on that, it's this middle way theory between what actors think about, what they think they should do, but also what they do in practice, and how decisions themselves often don't go the way people, not just me as an individual or you as an individual, but states or non-state actors don't go the way they assume it to go. And why? Why don't they go this way? All these types of questions and subject areas is something we touch upon in foreign policy analysis. Global governance is another one that I have a particular interest in leading. And that looks at how governance itself works. So when one thinks of governance, one often thinks of government, but it's not exactly the same. It's how do different actors create rules, institutions, norms that they are a part of. And global governance is interesting because, again, what we emphasize in the international relations program is from the most micro level. So you and I as an individual, how we live and experience our individual lives, all the way up to the local level, how local communities work, how they govern themselves, how they work together. And then at the more international or regional, how do these different regions interact as part of an overall region, and then go beyond that to a world or a global context. Each of these levels are touching upon notions of governance. And so we're looking at how these different dynamics work on these different levels and impact on how the world governs itself, of how we shape the world, the rules we create or don't create, the norms, what we consider is right, appropriate or not appropriate. Is it appropriate, for instance, to produce a shirt made by child labor? And by thinking of all of this, we get a better sense of how the world works and why it works the way it does. And that touches upon elements of global governance. So international relations is a generalist subject, especially at undergraduate level. And it's not the same, and I just say this here, that you know exactly what you're going to do when you start an international relations program. With that stated, it gives one lots of different opportunities because one develops one's communication and analytical skills, soft skills. So now let me go into the types of jobs that one can do. So there is an emphasis with IR on different levels. One thing I would start off with, the obvious side of international relations, and through the internships in the third year and through future experiences that students have. Of course, some of them go on to prestigious master's programs or PhDs, but one goes on to work as part of the internships, but also later on for various international organizations. So one can be an employee, a political advisor for a particular political candidate or political party. One works for an international organization within particularly the United Nations system. And these are experiences, by the way, that students have even during the Karlshochschule when they're doing their internships and beyond. So that's really the more public sector, public sphere. Then we have the private sector because in a sense, and this is something I emphasized at the beginning of this, job opportunities, because one has quite broad and generalist and interdisciplinary skills, one can also and does get work, former students getting work in the private sector. So we have a whole host of students who go on to great things, as I referred to, working in whether it's the European Union, the United Nations system, working for non-governmental organizations, and also in the private sector. There's two different ways of answering it, and forgive me for sounding like a diplomat. International relations. There's a yes and there's a no to the answer, I would say. So it's an element, bits of both. The no part is that I would suggest that international relations is open for many different types of people with many different interests in different subjects. It's not a question, to be direct about this, if one is more introverted or extroverted, one is more creative, whatever the point might be, because each of these elements are a part of what international relations is. So in that sense, there isn't a typical international relations student. On the other hand, where I think there is an importance to consider, is there a curiosity to learn about what's going on in the world on a political, a social, and economic level? Is there something that you want to do in the future? Again, you don't need to know exactly what you want to do in the future, but is there something that motivates you? Having this curiosity and willing to learn about these different subject areas, I would say, is what makes someone, with an element, of course, of thinking critically and creatively, is what makes an IR student an IR student. And therefore, I would encourage anyone who thinks or feels that they fit some of that description to very seriously consider this international relations program.